Today's Imprint Weekly podcast is brought to you by Accenture. Change is afoot in child welfare. Change that means agencies focus on results for children and keep far more of them safe at home with their own families. Accenture's child welfare team is leading the way in the effort to ensure technology does its part in that success story. Accenture offers cutting-edge case management tools that ensure agencies can see insights that drive decision-making and caseworkers have information they need at their fingertips. Together, these tools help agencies stay laser-focused, reinventing child welfare into a source of strength for families when they need it. For more information, visit www.accenture.com/childwelfare.
Hello and welcome to the Imprint Weekly podcast. I'm John Kelly, senior editor of the Imprint, daily news site covering child welfare and youth justice around the country. You can read all of our coverage at imprintnews.org or check us out on Facebook or Twitter at the Imprint News. You can also sign up on our homepage for our free weekly and monthly newsletters, and for professionals in child welfare and youth justice, subscribe to our Youth Services Insider section for a closer look at news on business policy and practice. The Imprint Weekly podcast is also a member of the Safe Camp Audio Network. Check out our show page and all of Safe Camp's other great podcasts at safecampaudio.org on the web or Safe Camp Audio on social media. On this week's episode, Carole Hussey of Evolv Strategy Group joins us to discuss how new forms of artificial intelligence like ChatGPT and Bards might impact the work of child welfare or youth justice systems. And we also delve into the decidedly unsexy but very important topic of why so few states are aggressively moving towards upgrades of their case management systems. Carole and I chatted for a while, and I have actually been away for the annual convening of the Institute for Nonprofit News, INN. Shout out to them for hosting a great conference on my home campus of George Washington University. It was very fun to be back as a real life adult, not just student on the campus. Those kids have a way, way better food court than we did when I was there. I'm really old. So we're going to skip headlines for this week. Just two quick updates, though, on things we had talked about last week. First, on the so-called family Miranda bills. These are legislative efforts both in Texas and New York to basically institute a requirement that parents would be, administered an oral and written kind of advisory of their rights at the point that a CPS worker was coming to the door to conduct an investigation. In Texas, Governor Greg Abbott has signed the state's version of that bill that had already passed the legislature when we updated you last week, so that has officially become law. Similar pieces of legislation were introduced in both chambers of the New York legislature, the General Assembly and the Senate there. Those bills needed to move out of the committee and up for full vote this week, and that did not happen. So it looks like it will be 2024 before there's another swing at passing family Miranda in New York State. The other thing that we discussed as kind of a looming deadline last week is the Brackeen v. Holland case, which is a Supreme Court case over sort of the future constitutionality of the Indian Child Welfare Act. So all sorts of different points about the law that were taken up in the oral arguments. They did not release an opinion last week in the Brackeen case, so it now continues to kind of narrow down when the likely release will come. It's almost certainly going to be on a Thursday. It will probably either be Thursday the 15th, so a couple days after you're probably listening to this, or the 22nd. Usually the Supreme Court wraps that up at the end of June and heads off to vacation. For anybody who really wants to geek out and find the decision or the opinion in the moment when it's released, two recommendations. You can go to the Supreme Court's website and go find on the left side, there's a reference that I think is something called opinions. If you go to that page and just kind of keep hitting refresh around 10 a.m., they start to release those a little easier. You can go to scotusblog.com, which is an amazing news site covering all things Supreme Court. They reliably have sort of a live feed where one of their reporters, Amy Howe, is kind of hosting kind of a live chat as the Supreme Court cases are rolled out. I would recommend that. It's a little more fun too. You can see what people are talking about. So the Brackeen case didn't come out, but what did come out last week officially is Safe Camp Audio, our podcast network here at Fostering Media Connections, featuring some of the best shows on child welfare and youth justice topics in the country. I've talked about it several times in the last couple of weeks on the podcast. We are officially launched now. safecampaudio.org, Safecamp Audio on your social media. You are going to be hearing featured guest interviews on this podcast over the summer with some of the hosts of those shows. So stay tuned for that. And yeah, go check us out, safecampaudio.org, Safecamp Audio on social media. Let's get right into it with our guest. Here is our conversation with Carole Hussey. You might have heard about and already played around with ChatGPT or Bard, the so-called chatbots that are rapidly gaining users across the globe. We're joined today by Carole Hussey, formerly of Public Consulting Group and KPMG, now doing her own thing through Evolv Strategy Group, to discuss how these forms of artificial intelligence, AI, might impact the work of child welfare or youth justice systems. And then we'll maybe talk about some other spicy topics in the world of AI and tech. So Carole, thanks for joining us on the Imprint Weekly Podcast.
Thanks for having me. I'm delighted to be here. Always fun to chat with you, John.
So gotta get these folks to know you a little bit before we get into the serious stuff. So you have to give me at least one favorite. You can give me more. The categories are TV and movies, musical groups, books, sports teams. Carole Hussey, what do you got for us?
Wow. Well, I don't watch a whole lot of TV, sadly, I guess. I would say favorite movie, very cheesy. I love romantic comedies. So I'm going to go with Under the Tuscan Sun because of the beautiful Italian scenery, which I love.
I think you might be the first rom-com recommended. 132 episodes it took us to get to a rom-com. Definitely some cheesy TV shows. You're not alone in that.
Very, very shameless. I love it.
Nice. So I am not the techiest myself. So I think maybe we should start with you explaining to myself and the audience, exactly how something like a ChatGPT or Bard, which are often called, AI chatbots or large language models, like how they work. So to take us Luddites into sort of the behind the scenes, because it's not magic. I mean, there are people, human beings building this and fueling it with information, but that's about as far as my knowledge goes. So take it away, Carole. How do these things work?
Yeah, absolutely. So, obviously ChatGPT, as you mentioned, is an artificial intelligence tool. This is not a new thing. They've been around for a long time, but for whatever reason, they are now the hot topic in all of media, right? We're hearing about it every day. I've been on a little bit of a soapbox of late about ways in which we could use things like TikTok in human services, family well-being. So now I'm pivoting because the area of interest right now is ChatGPT. So in layman's terms, ChatGPT really is just a computer program that you can kind of communicate with conversationally as you would a human. So you're going to present it questions, which are called prompts. And then the AI processes sort of run behind the scenes, scouring big volumes of data to bring back an answer, information back to you that it has derived from the data that's available. So GPT, not that you need to know this, stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer. You'll never need to know that on any test. Even.
But now I do.
Yeah, but now you know. ChatGPT, the most common version being used right now is the free version, which uses version 3.5. If you want to pay the $20 and upgrade to Plus, then you get the latest version, which is version 4. Bard is the competitor, the Google brand competitor, and then Microsoft has Bing Chat. They all have their own sort of language models on the back end, but similar, in nature. ChatGPT certainly being the front runner and, kind of like the Kleenex now of chat. But yeah, that's it. I mean, clearly there's a whole lot of more complicated technology under the hood, but there's so many ways to use these tools. You could use them to generate written content, conduct research, write code, even simple things like planning a menu for the week or a vacation or a wedding, so everyday uses and as well as very highly complex uses as well. So it's really interesting to think about the world of opportunities that we have with this new technology.
Have you messed around with it a little bit personally? You played around with
it every single day.
Give me like one work example and one play example.
Okay, so work example is if I'm writing an article I might use ChatGPT to get me started on something. Maybe I'm having, writer's block one day and I just need to brainstorm with someone, but I don't have a someone. I use ChatGPT. So that's sort of my work world. On a personal note, I've suddenly developed a really keen interest in potentially exploring real estate investing. So I am using using ChatGPT to really gain some understanding of all of the strategies that might be available for that.
Yeah, no, I've messed around a little. I'll tell you, I actually just to sort of compare the two, right? Because like you said, ChatGPT certainly like just came like gangbusters. Like nobody knew what it was, and then all of a sudden it had like more subscribed users in a month than anything had ever gotten, right?
Yeah.
Or something like that. And then Bard is, I think emerging, I guess, as a competitor to it.
It is.
So I just prompted both write me a podcast introduction for Carole Hussey of Evolv Consulting Group, just to see how they both did. And I think this is indicative of like what you started with, which is like, we're at the beginning here. This is not, I think the potential and pitfalls of these will be yet to be seen entirely. One came up with a very rhetorical, non-specific introduction for you. Mm-hmm. And then the other one, I'm not going to reveal, was like, I don't know enough about this person, so I'm not going to do it. Which I was like, okay, you're being honest and you're being semi-helpful.
Yeah.
If I combine the two or whatever. But yeah, no, I've played around with it a couple times and stuff. And I think, it's certainly fun on just that level. But we're here not to talk about the fun part. We're here to talk about the actual practical use and how you see this as a tech expert of sorts impacting the child welfare scene. So, there's surely a very intense conversation in child welfare around AI and artificial intelligence generally, specifically, the use of predictive tools to assess risk, to guide decision-making around investigating or even separating families. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but, first here, I want your thoughts on how the widespread incorporation of these types of things, these GPTs and language models, could impact the office, so to speak, of child welfare. Like, how are they going to impact the actual administration and execution of it? I thought, if you're up for it, I'd start with just sort of calling out some clear parts of the process, kind of rapid fire, and I'd love to kind of get your thoughts on like where you could see these things playing a role in those. And then I definitely want to leave it open for you to kind of say, okay, that's cool, your list, but here's how I'm thinking about it. You up for that?
Oh yeah, let's give it a whirl.
How would you see this emerging technology in terms of taking reports of suspected maltreatment? And I also caution, I don't mean in terms of deciding about them, which is right. Loaded. I'm talking about the process of like taking them in.
Yeah, no, I mean, operationally, obviously, that's where the big opportunities are here without getting into the risks, which we can talk about later. But in terms of taking a report, there are so many ways in which that data comes into an agency, right? So whether it be through an IVR system, phone system, or an email or whatever, and taking that information and pulling that into the system and putting it in the right places in the database so that that information can then be used to leverage business rules and other opportunities for reporting and things behind the scenes that need to happen, right? Not getting into decision making, but really making sure that that information that is gathered, collected, lands in the right place. Right now, we have a lot of data issues in child welfare, and how that information gets into the system, how it's put in there, could certainly be improved. Data timeliness, data quality, lots of opportunities in regard to that particular scenario.
Okay. Casework. That's a big one. That's obviously a big echelon.
Yeah, casework's big. It's big, and it's also, an area that's not defined in a very clear way that's consistent from state to state, right? Case management means a lot of different things to different people, and there's lots of different types of case management. So I'm going to go very general here and talk about one of the areas that I think has the greatest opportunity is how we engage with children and families and, older youth, and being able to provide information back to them and have them engage with the system in a different way. So when we look at those types of opportunities, particularly, if you think about like non-minor dependents and older youth, there are so many things that we can do with AI to help them in terms of like life skills training, emotional support, mental health resources, allowing them to use that capability to identify resources and supports in their area, potentially educational, vocational, or other services that might be available to them as an older youth who, has aged out of the system. A lot of those kids don't even know what they're eligible for, and they aren't really that keen to stay in touch with the agency any longer than they have to sometimes. And so being able to use this type of technology to allow them to engage with the organization on their terms really provides huge benefits, but also in some ways may decrease the technical complexity required for a lot of the traditional systems integration and data management challenges that we have with staying connected with community-based services.
Monitoring families' progress. So if you're, I guess that is to some extent casework, but how do you see this playing into or influencing or improving efficiency of just of monitoring people?
Yeah, that's a very hands-on sort of process today, and there's lots of remembering to do things and scheduling of things and managing time and calendars and whatnot. And I could see a capability by which things are just being done, and there's a lot of different potential data sources that feed into a case plan, for example, right? So the families agreed to do these things and they go do them, but then it requires them to notify the caseworker that it's been done, and the caseworker has to go in and double check that it's been done. But by leveraging some of these AI capabilities, there's no need for anybody to be doing all of that. Through certain capabilities, that information can just be brought back into the system, and then no one has to touch it. We have a significant issue with workforce in child welfare, so we should be looking at how we can use ChatGPT and other AI technologies to minimize sort of those administrative and rote functions that those caseworkers are doing so that they have more time to actually do social work, which is what they signed up for.
Yeah, I think what you just said is probably the most, would you agree? I think from an administrative level, that would probably be the most attractive potential for this stuff.
Yeah. Workflow management and optimization just in general, I think is really essential to the workforce issue. And there's a lot of workforce opportunities here for sure.
I would think also there's some opportunity for this sort of, we're talking a lot thus far about how like people that work for a child welfare agency or maybe one of their providers would experience or interact with this, but their contact with the courts, which is obviously looms very large in a lot of these cases, particularly when kids are elsewhere, whether foster care or kinship care, must be, I feel like I've read up a little bit on the AI chatbots, and the consensus seems to be that it is in the world of lawyering and court that there's quite a bit of potential for, layoffs, which on some level, but just also just the ability for these things to do maybe, filing and notifications and things like that in a more organized way, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the challenge for a lot of child welfare agencies is that the courts are not always centralized at the state level. In fact, I don't know that they are anywhere. And so when you think about automating anything for courts, you're automating it for every county or every solicitor, right? Because they all do it a little bit different. And so is there a way then to be able to accommodate those differences and still automate it? Because caseworkers spend a ton of time preparing for court, getting the paperwork ready, having things signed off, and sending the information over within so many hours or days prior to a hearing. So there's tons and tons of opportunity around courts.
One thing when I was like sort of noodling on this, that also for the judges, right? We have one of our kind of regular columnists, Vivek Sankaran, has one of his kind of big drum beats in his columns is, we need the judges in this space to really call balls and strikes a little better and really know the law and enforce the law and not really interject so much personal feeling into cases sometimes. Not all judges, I think is a general thing, right? So it seems like incredibly valuable, like on the like when a Supreme Court justice or some big state justice wants to decide on a case or something big in front of them, they've got a clerk, they've got people that can go and do a bunch of research. It seems like pretty advantageous for a judge who wanted to do a good job in child welfare court, who definitely does not have that kind of human capital at
Yeah.
hand to be able to do something like, find me the relevant cases based on this description, paste in, details, and then get something back that's, really informative of like, okay, here's recent state things or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, AI in general is just a workhorse that can't begin to compare to what a human can get done in the same amount of time, right? So where there is, volumes and volumes of data, and you are looking to identify, case trends and patterns that occur, and inconsistencies and outliers, and being able to run these kind of tools against it and then provide back. One of the big opportunity areas with this is policy reform, and weeding out equity and bias, and trying to get at the root of some of that. That certainly is a very concerning area, and one reason why a lot of people are opposed to AI is because of those biases that already exist in the data. But what if AI could help us figure out where that bias exists so that we could tackle that problem?
Let's get to that a little bit more in a second. Just last thing on the workforce stuff, though. Obviously, as we were talking about, there's lots of efficiencies that can be achieved here to make people's lives easier, to make a system better, possibly. Obviously, something else that people are concerned about is, are humans going to be laid off and lose jobs and erased from parts of the workforce as a result of, people embracing this stuff on a big corporate or governmental level? So, child welfare and youth justice systems, I would love your thoughts on this. It kind of occurred to me that they're weirdly well positioned in that they're already struggling to get enough people to work. So maybe the efficiency that's captured just simply puts the number of people needed at the level that they are currently successful at hiring them, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, I agree with you there. I mean, I heard of an agency just last week that got approval to hire 150 people, and my everybody's reaction is probably great. That's wonderful. We need them. But my reaction was, where are you going to get them? And then how are you going to keep them? Right? Because I read of an agency recently that had a 90% turnover rate in their first year for caseworkers. So that, and most agencies are operating on a 50% or higher turnover rate in general. And then you look at vacancy rates, right, where we can't fill positions. So we've got to do something different. And I think there's a lot of different things that can be done outside of technology, and but in conjunction with technology. Where can we reevaluate the work that caseworkers are currently doing? What things can we do to automate and gain those efficiencies? What things could perhaps be done by a paraprofessional or others, so that the people that are doing casework, that's what they're doing 99% of their time, is helping families. We're not going to lay people off. We don't have people to lay off, but we have to really do something radically different than just hiring more bodies. That's not going to solve this problem.
The National Association of Counsel for Children advances children's and parents' rights by supporting a diverse, inclusive community of child welfare lawyers to provide zealous legal representation, and by advocating for equitable anti-racist solutions co-designed by people with lived experience. Learn more at naccchildlaw.org, counselforkids.org, and at our 46th National Child Welfare Law Conference this August.
I think thus far what we've talked about are possible upsides. And obviously, like, loss of jobs is not an upside. That's a reality. And then maybe that looks different for these two fields than other ones. But do you have some concerns or fears about like where it could go in a circumstance where systems are just moving ever more rapidly towards, roboticizing and AI-ifying everything they do? Like, it just almost could see it, right, becoming like a little bit of an aphrodisiac where it's like, this is great, let's just keep going with this stuff. But we know that the work involved in these systems to some extent has to stay human. Like, you cannot.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is, like, we have to really be thoughtful about where we're applying this technology and what's our goal in applying it. I'm always in for the whole tech for good philosophy, right? So if I'm using this technology so that I can help better provide supports and services to a family to keep them out of crisis, that seems like a very great place to apply the technology. If I'm thinking about doing something that is, in some way going to preemptively accuse someone of something or cause some kind of downstream trauma, maybe that's not the best place to do that, right? And especially with the new technology. This thing has come out like crazy, right? Faster than any technology that I can recall in my lifetime. So with the speed with which this thing is being implemented, we do need to be careful. You had an experience you described earlier where you asked two different chatbots the exact same question and got two kind of wildly different answers, right? The other issue is that, some of these, like, for example, ChatGPT, the data only goes back that they're accessing to 2021. So if you ask it about something that's happened since then, you're going to get probably a fabricated response. Or if it's leveraging data, it's been trained on data that's inaccurate or has biases, you're going to get that revealed in your answer. And so when we're thinking about how we're going to apply this, it should never, ever, ever be for any kind of punitive purposes. Maybe we'll get there someday. I don't know. But child welfare in general, is changing. We want to be preventative. We want to support families. We want to prevent removals. We're seeing a significant drop in foster care. It's all great stuff. But if we start using this to identify places for removals and, perpetuating bias that exists in other data sources that are being used, that's not the ethical way to use a solution of this nature, a new technology like this.
Almost kind of sounds like Pollyannish, but it seems like maybe the federal administration's time, since they seem to have taken an interest in the appropriate use of AI, right? They seem like they're looking into it to really try and get some sort of baseline consensus from both, parents and youth on, like, what do you want to be more efficient about the way that you experience the systems? I mean, yes, some would just feel like, I don't think I should experience these systems. But in terms of like how you do, where does human contact, where does like a personal relationship matter and where doesn't it? And kind of start with there, because I think the risk of not centering it there is like, we're going to do what's best for government and the bottom line first, and then the workforce second, not to take away from them at all. But at the end of the day, it's about those people who actually either get a reminder from a chatbot or actually have a human call them. And when do they want that and when do they not,
We should be including those folks in all of our conversations about technology and how we're going to use technology to better support them. There's a phrase, I cannot remember who coined it, but it's nothing about me without me, right? So if you are going to be working with me, why don't we talk about how best we can do that? The families that are involved in child welfare programs have a lot of very differing needs, right? They're trying to work or go back to school and take care of their kids and do the best they can. And sometimes by using some of these modern technologies, it alleviates the stress that they have in having to deal with all of the requirements that we put upon them. And if we can't make that a little bit easier so they can actually complete all those things that we put in their case plan, wouldn't that be great? So I do think there are ways to do this. I think we should be involving them in the conversation and finding out, the places where we aren't going to end up with some really terrible unintended consequences. Let's let the technology mature. Because the other thing is we don't want government to say, no, we're not going to use this at all because it's scary, and I get why that has happened with predictive analytics. But we do want to say, okay, if we're going to use it, let's just be really thoughtful about where and when and how.
So that's a good segue to that discussion about predictive analytics, which is very different, but it's still rooted in artificial intelligence and algorithmic kind of decision-making trees and language models. For listeners who don't know, the real concerns here about the use of predictive to set risk scores that caseworkers can use to actually decide things. See, me and Carole have been talking about thus far is, carrying out your job day to day. This is more making decisions about how you intersect with families' lives, investigating them, even maybe separating them, The concern is more nuanced than what I'm going to describe here, but all algorithmic things are built on large pools of data and information. And the worry is that since many believe we are over-involving and have over-involved the poor, people of color, people with disabilities in child welfare systems and youth justice systems, that history gets cooked in a way where, now we're talking about the future of decision-making going down that same road. So, I guess I'm curious for your thoughts on this. Like, have you found these tools to be effective? Are you convinced of that? Do you think this is an aspect that can actually be changed or developed, or do you see this more as black and white? We should or shouldn't do that,
Yeah, no, I don't see it fully black and white, right? But I think we're on the cusp of some great things with this type of technology, but we don't want to advance it too quickly. The notion of using these tools for risk assessments, for investigations, and certainly for removals, I just don't think we should be doing that at this time. Maybe later, I don't know. The thing with these models is they are learning models. The more data they get, the more you evaluate how they're responding to the data, they get better over time. So I think if we go in knowing what those limitations are, knowing what those risks are, that informs where we're going to use the tools. So that's something that I think we just have to accept out of the gate. They're not perfect, but nothing is, right? So if I'm doing something, for example, very manually now that takes me 20 hours, but I can use this tool and it takes me 3, but I still have to do some more work. That's okay. You just saved me 17 hours, right? Or maybe you saved me 15. And so we have to go into it with eyes wide open. We want to be constantly evaluating it. I mentioned that I use it every day, but it just helps me do my job. It doesn't replace the things I need to do. I still have to take what it's given me, adjust it, alter it, put some tone and personality into it, in terms of writing an article, for example. So it's not something that we should look at as a replacement for human functions.
Okay, switching gears to the one of just the sexiest term in child welfare, comprehensive child welfare information systems, aka CCWIS. I'm kidding, obviously. It's not a sexy topic, but it's kind of an important behind the scenes one, and I know that Carole knows as much as anybody about it. So I would be stupid not to ask her a little bit about this. So, this has been like a decade and change now with these systems. There's been money on the table from the federal government for states to build these CCWIS systems, which are meant to be sort of an update and upgrade to, our very first statewide case management and information tools, which were called SACWIS. You and I talked for a story that we put out in 2017. I think you were with the Public Consulting Group at the time, about the fact that this money was on the table, but states were really not moving towards it very aggressively to use for a new approach. They kind of were just tiptoeing. So you and I have also talked recently kind of offline about this, and my takeaway from those conversations is still kind of pretty much the case. So I think I'll just start with why? What is stopping states from improving their systems to be better at anything?
Yeah.
Given that we all it's just a weird deal from the outside for a layman, because it's like you ask 100 people, they'd say that the technological advancement of child welfare systems is terrible, but nobody's moving to do anything about it. So what's the problem?
Well, as one of the biggest advocates for CWIS when it first came out, it does pain my heart to get to this point to say that, I certainly have been disappointed in the lack of progress in this area. And I've worked with quite a few states on this. And, I tried to, in thinking about our conversation today, go back to the original, benefits that were presented from ACF to the states on why they were changing the regulations and what should propel you to take action. And, they cited a number of things, but one of the biggest things was to really allow states, because the previous regulations under SACWIS were so prescriptive, and that they would now allow states to do something, whatever you want to do that suits your business model, your agency needs. It's not just about federal reporting, although you still do have to do all of that, but really to support program and practice and encourage innovation. And the final rule, as you said, that came out in 2016. We saw that slow adoption. Here we are 7 years later, and only a handful of states have implemented anything. And those that have implemented, frankly, are in various stages of completion. No state has yet to achieve CWIS compliance, although there have been, a number of reviews and things that are going on with ACF. There's been some trends, right? So one of the biggest trends that we're seeing is states adopting the use of CRMs. So for those that aren't aware, customer relationship management platforms, we commonly refer to them. They were originally built as a sales pipeline management tool back in the day, and they've become popular in government on a number of fronts. Largely for tech, CIOs who want to standardize their environment, things like that, all makes sense. But, these CRMs are not really the end all be all. They don't do everything that a child welfare agency needs it to do. And so, one of the things that I'm seeing is that for the states that have moved forward is that, they're just replacing this 20 or sometimes 30-year-old legacy system with modern technology. So they're swapping the old for the new. And you can get some benefits from doing that. So I don't want to say there's been no progress. By simply moving from an old solution to a new one, you will reap some benefits from just the fact that, you're using something more modern, has more modern capabilities. The problem has been that when you decommission a legacy system, those systems are like spaghetti behind the scenes, right? They're all highly entangled in functionality. And so while the new regulations want everything to be modular, you can't decommission in a modular way. Not easily. You can, but not easily. And so states are like, okay, we're just going to get rid of this old thing. We're going to do the new thing, and we're going to, shut that off and have a new solution in place. A lot of states have gone with a single vendor to do it all, rather than really kind of looking at, what solutions might already exist that I could use for certain elements of my CWIS, which was encouraged when CWIS first came out. Pricing has been all over the place. I've seen everything from 11 million to 160 million. It's insane.
Sorry to interrupt, but do you see a substantive difference in what 11 million bought one state versus
100%. Yes, lots of differences. Yeah, for sure. And without, wanting to call out specific states or disparage in any way, there is a huge difference. And I think in some, we've certainly seen some fits and starts, some states that have, stopped their work, started again, paused, restarted. So, there's a lot of lessons learned happening in the states that have implemented. In my opinion, there's been a decrease in competition of these systems. There's really only, 3 vendors that are kind of coming out on top as delivering these solutions. And that was also not the intent. The intent was to increase competition and to provide more solutions and to have that kind of innovative capabilities. But we're not seeing that either.
The idea when they did this rule to just kind of set up, what people could do with their CCWIS funding in 2016, are you saying their hope was that states would go out, maybe they have a primary vendor who's going to build the core of their system, but that they would be free to, if they wanted this one company that did a really cool job of, one aspect, one particular thing they wanted to do, they could go out and attach that. And that's not really been the experience.
Not really. Most of them are configuring the platform from intake to, whatever, financials, eligibility, case management, all the traditional SACWIS things. They're configuring them out on these CRM solutions. And so, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. We're still seeing, 3, 4, 5 year implementation timeframes, right? So you're not getting an incremental return on that technology investment over time. You're still waiting 3 or 4 or 5 years to get anything back. And I think some of this goes back to the RFP, right? So when the RFP comes out, you can look at an RFP and pretty quickly tell that it came from the IT shop because it's very technologically oriented. There's very little business requirements in it. I think when I last talked to you, I mentioned that the Annie Casey Foundation actually created a CWIS model RFP that states could use for free. And it talked about your business goals and your guideposts and your constraints. Encouraged thinking about what is it that you want to get out of this investment, whether it's operational efficiencies or looking at how we're improving outcomes and, all of those things. And no state has used that yet. Not even parts of it, from what I can tell. So, I just think if we could get back to, like I would in any part of my life, if I'm going to make a big investment on something, I want to think about what am I getting out of that? And so really thinking about creating those key performance indicators, looking at what are the operational efficiencies I want to gain, what are those outcomes I think I can improve by implementing this technology. That should be defined up front. And it's being done or it's not being done with consideration of the broader universe of stakeholders, right? We talked a little bit earlier about people with lived experience and getting closer to the point of where data originates to get that into the system helps the workforce issue. It improves data quality and timeliness. It empowers families to engage with the agency in a different way. And so we're really missing a lot of those business opportunities when we think about the requirements for these new solutions.
I feel like this is an inherently wonky kind of technological thing. It's very hard to talk about this stuff without redounding to, acronyms. That's how it is. But try to bring for life to people, like, give me an example, okay, of something that technology could, better tech and a better system would help an agency do. That would have been impossible using the old SACWIS systems. That the new way of thinking, the best version of CCWIS could help them accomplish. I feel like that would bring this to life for people. So go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'll go back to how we engage with families and how we engage with youth, right? And what's everyone have? Everyone has a phone, right? So we could better leverage mobile apps as a way to, engage with people for everything. Think about a foster family who needs to upload receipts for reimbursement for something for a child that's in their home. Very simple opportunity there. From a caseworker side, they're out in the field. We want them out in the field. We want them there as much as possible. If you could use mobile apps for licensing foster homes, for doing assessments and completing case notes and visits using some of the AI technology we talked about earlier. These products exist. They can be implemented in 6 to 9 months in some cases. So you could go ahead and do that at the beginning of your roadmap, right? Get some immediate relief to your families, to your caseworkers, while you're working on some of those harder back office functions. And you're really getting some immediate benefit on that investment. Those are the real life things that exist today. They don't have to be built. They were purpose built for child welfare already. They're on the market. They're cost effective. Why are you rebuilding that? Right? So that's just one very simple example. And I often see mobile and portals at the end of a product roadmap. So meaning you're going to build, take, and everything else. We'll talk about portals and mobility later.
When it's the most important thing in all of our lives. Everybody. I think of it on the same level. Like, it occurs to me that, let's say some states had really had a sophisticated solution to that inside of their CCWIS when the pandemic hit. And we had all this money to help current and former foster youth out. Could that have gone significantly more efficiently for those states? I bet we would have seen some states clearly have a much better response rate, right, to that stuff.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I was talking to one state right after COVID about engagement with older youth during the pandemic. And just by allowing them to engage via phone, as opposed to having them come into the office, actually increased their level of engagement, increased what their responsiveness to showing up to meetings, because in some cases they might not be real keen to show up at your office, but if you're going to talk to them over the phone, they're more likely to do that. And so as we empower people that we're working with in child welfare, whether it's older youth or bio families or foster families, and we make things easier for them, they're going to be more apt to do the things that they need to do. And so it makes that engagement not just timely and all those compliancy things that we need to do, right? But also it starts to build a better relationship between the caseworker and the family, or the caseworker and the youth. Because now we're saying, we trust you. We're going to be transparent with you. We're going to let you do that on a time that's convenient for you. You don't have to come into the office, from 9 to 5. And so when we can think about that, it's a win-win for everyone. It really, really is. And that's just one example. The mobility is just one example of ways in which we can rethink how we're using modern technology to modify how we do the work in a way that really can improve outcomes and really can achieve real practical value to the organization.
Are you a professional in the field of child welfare, juvenile justice, or other family and youth services? Subscribe today to Youth Services Insider, the imprint's exclusive section on all the insider news you need to stay in the know. Funding opportunities, major federal and state policy shifts, interviews with key leaders in the field. It's all available only for our Youth Services Insider subscribers. Sign up for a monthly or yearly subscription today by visiting imprintnews.org/subscribe. Our podcast listeners get 10% off their subscription by entering the promo code podcast10. That's imprintnews.org/subscribe and get 10% off your subscription by entering the promo code podcast10 today.
Obviously, money is always a factor when you're trying to examine why is something happening or not happening. But I also wonder, do you see one challenge being that child welfare systems, day to day have to deal with the children, the families in front of them, and that it's not anyone's job really to think about the future and to do kind of forward thinking on things like, setting up the next 50 years of case management for the agency? I mean, do you feel like I feel like I'm teeing it up. I genuinely don't know. I mean, is your experience that some of these states actually put somebody in charge of doing that, or is it just somebody's fifth role when you talk to states?
It's kind of a mixed bag. In some cases, the child welfare, as soon as they hear me say the CWIS word, they just say, go talk to my CIO. That's an IT thing.
Yeah.
But I am not, if you look back at some of my really old articles, one of the first ones I wrote was called There's No Such Thing as an IT Project. And I still believe that all these years later. It's a business project, but it has IT components. So the business people have to be very involved. One of the best CWIS projects that was completed, and I will give kudos to this state, Idaho, was because it was highly, highly business led. The director at the time was very involved in this, and she challenged everything they did. They were very focused on business process reengineering. She was involved day to day. She had a great team of programmatic folks who worked with their systems integrator to implement this solution. And so in that particular case, I think that the involvement of the program is, in all cases, the involvement of the program is critical to setting it up for that next N number of years, right? Because if you leave it to the tech people to handle, they don't really know all your pain points. And if they ask you, what you need, you're probably just going to tell them, I just need another button or another drop down or whatever. It's hard to imagine what the world of possibilities are when you've been using the same system for 20 years. So I think having supplemental help, whether that's another vendor to help you think about the world of possibilities, is really important, because a systems integrator is going to build what you tell them to do, right? But in Idaho's case, they had actually worked with another vendor to help them reevaluate their business processes and to reconsider how they might do things differently. Before you put your RFP out to a systems integrator and identify a platform, you should be thinking about that. And that doesn't always happen in that order. If you've already hired your systems integrator, you're not going to be doing business process reengineering on the fly.
It's important conversations to have, because I mean, we just like, you step back and think about what are the pervasive problems in child welfare: communication, better knowledge about what's happening and tracking and evaluating, the synergy and the conversations between the system and the court. I mean, these are all things that just fixing tech is not going to solve that, but it can be the sort of undergirding of a better approach if you do it right. And, it's just sad, it's just kind of a bummer that it seems to just be bumping along on that.
It's such a bummer, such a bummer. The one other thing I'll note too, that if the states are starting on this journey, is really, really think about organizational change management right at the very beginning. When you do that, I mean, organizational change management, not just for your business folks, but for your clients who you're working with, your families, your youth, and also your IT department. Because the way the help desk works is going to be different. The types of skills that are needed to support modern systems is going to be different. And so OCM is almost always focused on the program when it's included, but it's rarely focused on the tech department. And that's a big, big change too, because they've been supporting this old legacy system, right, for decades. And now they're going to have to change how they function as well. So it's a bummer. I'm not giving up on CWIS. I'm still the cheerleader over here, hoping that it takes off, because, geez, if any, program needs some technology help, it certainly is child welfare. They've got some big problems.
Maybe it needs a repackaging. We just come up with a more dynamic name that you can kind of push publicly. Because, right, I mean, I'm half kidding, but it's very hard to get somebody to say CWIS is this important thing in terms of making this a more family-focused, preservation-oriented system. But it is. It's just a weird name.
Well, and given, I like to think that given where we are now with child welfare practice changing so much, maybe it wasn't so bad that there was a slow roll with CWIS, because now with Family First Prevention Services Act and this notion of getting upstream and, more community partners and whatnot, maybe if you haven't started, now is the time to start, so that you can think about things in a different way than what you would have back in, 2016. But, there are some states that have said, I'm not going to pursue CWIS. There's just not enough money to incentivize us to go replace this whole system. Medicaid, when they were going through all of their system enhancements, they were getting 90 cents on the dollar. And for CWIS, it's 50 cents. And they're, if you draw down and continue doing what you're doing, maybe you're still getting 35 cents or 40 cents. And so there's just not enough incentive, right? The incentive comes when there's pain or when there's money. I find, right?
Wow. Deep thought.
Right?
I do think maybe on the flip side of that, because that's definitely true, but the other thing is if there is truly one state whose system stands out. So I'll just take you at your word. I know nothing about Idaho, but let's say that's a very good system that was built thoughtfully and actually produces, demonstrably better process and better outcomes. We may know that 5 years from now. There may be clear indications. You may see them now. Maybe that certainty will drive more states to say, oh, we need this. Where the uncertainty that's built into going and exploring the build of the future for your system is what scares people off, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, I think you're right. And, I wish I could say, there's these 5 states that have done this amazing job and, we should go look at them. I just think they haven't really tapped into the business improvement opportunities or innovation, generally speaking, across the board.
Yeah.
And I think it's a missed opportunity because, you'll hear states say, geez, we got to get this right because we're going to be stuck with this for 20 years. And that's sort of, an archaic way of thinking, right? Because software, think about your phone, you get a new update every 2 or 3 months, right? Like we don't build it and then stop doing anything to it for 20 years or continue to duct tape and Band-Aid it. We need to start thinking about technology as something that evolves all the time, especially when we were talking about AI earlier, right? Like there's so many new technologies out. We can't even begin to imagine what's going to be available to us 2 years from now. And so if we just like throw up our hands and say we're done, we're going to miss out on evolving these technology solutions to continue to improve the really important delivery of services in health and human services.
Which I think, right, is the important piece of the modularity of it. Right, they stress the modularity, which is just like tech. That's like business talk for if you don't like this piece or it becomes antiquated, you can cleave it off instead of it paralyzing you from like adapting to a new thing. Right, you just cut it off and you build something else or put it in place.
I didn't even dive into that. I am not convinced that using these CRM solutions is a true modular, approach. But it is what it is. I don't have a beef with the platforms. Like I don't care which one you like. It's what you do with it that really matters. It's how you're leveraging that technology to really improve your program and your operations that matters to me. I have no skin in that game, but I do think there are a lot of other point solutions out there that are already built that are way better than anything you're going to configure into a platform in 1 year. And so why aren't you just using it? So, that's where I think we're missing some opportunity because there are some products out there that have been in play for years, that have had tons of R&D funding, that were purpose built for child welfare, that are getting completely pushed out of the market because everybody's configuring a CRM.
Carole Hussey, Evolv Strategy Group, thank you for joining us on the Imprint Weekly Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, John. It's fun as always.
Thanks to Carole Hussey of Evolv Strategy Group for joining us today. The Imprint Weekly Podcast is a production of the Safe Camp Audio Network, which is a division of Fostering Media Connections. Please visit safecampaudio.org on the web or Safe Camp Audio on all major social media. This podcast is produced and mixed by Christine Anjoko with music by Luke Giroux and Cyrus Elliott. If you enjoyed this episode, we would love it if you consider subscribing or giving us a 5-star rating on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you download your podcasts. And we would greatly appreciate if you consider supporting our work here on the podcast and in print. Small donations from our listeners and readers go a long way towards helping us grow and cover more great stories in child welfare and youth justice. To support us, it is very easy. You just visit imprintnews.org/donate. You can follow The Imprint on Twitter and Facebook by searching the handle @theimprintnews and visit us on the web at imprintnews.org. You can always get us over email at tips@imprintnews.org. I'm John Kelly, and we'll see you next week.